Okay, well, then I'm speaking to the students now. This is recorded. And students, I'd like to first of all tell you how disappointed I was when I got a call from the head of the Abuja office yesterday that the flight had been delayed till 1 o'clock. As soon as I was asked to go on this mission to Abuja, I think I was asked over the weekend by President Margi. My first thought was I was going to miss Tuesday's class, but at least I'd get back until Thursday or in advance of Thursday's class. But this delay makes that impossible. My reason for being here was largely ceremonial, which made it kind of all the more frustrating to be away from you. But it's been interesting. I went to our founder's birthday party, which was quite an event at his house, attended by dignitaries. And then yesterday, well, that wasn't interesting. I sat in two different sets of ceremonial presentations to inaugurate or celebrate the 50th year of the state's system of law schools. So it was lots and lots of attorneys and politicians, many of whom are lawyers, giving presentations and also pledging donations to the next 50 years of the law schools. So I was there basically as a representative of the university on ceremonial matters. So I wanted to talk to you about a few things. I think this will take a half an hour, maybe a little bit longer. I wish it were interactive. There's a chance that before this class session ends, I will pop in person. My flight leaves at 1. If everything is on time, I'll get to the university around 2:45. But at that same time, around 2:45, Gloria from the environmental department will come in and solicit your evaluations. She'll hand out 4 forms. You get a chance to evaluate your instructor or instructors, and I have to be out of the room for that, of course. Let me talk about your posters. Your posters will look great, I think, once they're printed. I saw a test print of one of our posters yesterday. I was very pleased with it. And if yours come out as sharp as that, you'll be proud of your posters. You'll enjoy standing next to it, getting photographs taken. And we plan, with your permission, to post a version of it on the website. And I think it's something that you'll be proud to show your colleagues. It will be useful to you when you go to apply for a job. The development exhibition, where these posters will be displayed, theoretically starts at 9 o'clock in Commencement Hall. And you are expected to be there at that time and stand by your posters on and off all day. And I've been arguing on your behalf that students don't want to spend an entire Saturday standing beside their posters. And right now the public relations people are rather insistent, but what we'll do is we'll set up a century system where maybe some of us stay behind. They will be bringing food. But it's important that you be there next to your poster at a key time and watch your email as to when that will be. Because your posters will be juried, which means that I will have colleagues look at your posters and fill out a small grade sheet and have a discussion with you, a brief one, about your poster. And this is all part of, besides giving you a chance to represent your command of course content, a preparation for your careers. Because one of the most common ways at conferences now, particularly for younger people, students and early professors, to represent their work is with technical posters that are juried, just like this one. The jurors will probably be Dr. Boyd, Dr. Baker, Fardeen, Jennifer Che, and maybe 1 or 2 people who don't know anything about your subject matter. to, or from the perspective of someone who knows nothing about your subject. Others, of course, are more knowledgeable, such as Doctors Boyd and Baker. So they'll be grading on such things as the walk-up impression. How does the poster look from a distance? Is it professional look? Does it make one want to approach it? They'll be grading the strength of your openings. Does it succeed in meeting the C3 criteria that I've taught you? Capturing one's interest, making one want to invest time to spend a little bit more. They'll evaluate the quality of the graphics, but the most important two criterion by which they'll evaluate it is how much did the poster tell the viewer that they didn't already know about water resources in Adamawa from your respective perspectives, groundwater, surface water, and so forth. So how much information did it set forth? How interesting and compelling was that information? And then how much does it tell you about sustainable development or the management of water, the correction of problems, if you will, that will make our water usage in your various sectors more sustainable? So they'll grade those things for me. I'm going to keep the sheets short. They'll also probably, I'm going to encourage them to ask you like one question or two, or possibly invite you through to briefly walk them through your poster. That's what you do at poster sessions at technical conferences. So be prepared for that. Now, as I said, you're probably going to have to sit there for a while by your poster. Let's use that time wisely. I'm about to talk about your presentation, your remaining assignments for this class. That will be a fabulous time for you to get further clarification and, in fact, direct help from me. I never go to an activity where there's going to be a lot of waiting, idle time, without taking my laptop. In fact, I already have my task that I'm going to work on if the flight is further delayed today set aside so I can be productive. I have my laptop and some work to do on it. But let's talk about your presentation next week. Once again, a rehearsal for life as it really is in this professional world. For instance, well, first of all, I want Radha and the two Ibrahims to go first. So Ibrahim Radha, Ibrahim Thanda, I want you to go on Tuesday, and then Hafsat and Harrison on Thursday. I wrote you some instructions to this, and if those names are not what match the instructions, then the instructions supersede what I just said. So that's the order we're going to talk about. So I want the presentations to get off to a good start. How do you do that? You get there early, you load the presentation onto the computer, and you bring it open so that in the first few seconds or minutes, agonizingly long minutes, if you're not prepared, you're not struggling to get the presentation installed, to overcome any problems with compatibility between the presentation, the computer and the projector. So have everything spooled up for a smooth start. You'll be graded for that because it's preparing you for real life. Beyond that, I want you to rehearse your presentation a little bit. Learn to speak to your slides and your audience walking through it. It's going to be a small group. It's not like giving an address to a large audience, but you want to be able to summon forth your thoughts to speak to your slides readily. I want the slides to look good. Dr. Tanawat's going to help you a little bit with that. And you should probably print some of your slides 2 or 4 on them. Miss Sarah will print those for you if you want. Try not to waste too much paper. If you're too many slides, you don't want to print them. But above all, and this goes to your posters, some of you know I was a little disappointed. Above all, I want your presentation to pull together the content from this class. And that's something very important I want to say. At the beginning of this class, I told you guys I was going to treat you like doctoral students, and that was based on the fact that you all seemed very engaged, your questions were good, your senior and your advancement through the 4-year process. I believe most of you are juniors and seniors. And you're at the stage where you need to be able to reach out and capture the content, as opposed to the professor spoon feeding it to you. That's the American style of education. And so I'm going to just briefly go over all the things that you've learned in this class. And for those of you who kind of didn't have it in your posters, it's like you couldn't think of what to say. It partly made me feel like I didn't do a good job instructing you, but it also made me feel like you, especially if you want to go to graduate school or be perceptive in your early career so you advance, you've got to learn information that isn't spoon-fed you, but is available, is presented in the context of the course of life, and pull it together. So we'll talk about that. Your presentation needs to pull together the content from the class that's relevant to your sector, your part of this subject, and apply it to Adamawa's resources, okay? After the paper, after the presentation, I'm going to ask you to write a white paper, but I'll give you more information about that while we're sitting together at the development exhibition, because you don't have time to work on the white paper now. You have to put all your energy into the presentation. And if you do a good job, the white paper will flow automatically. It'll be just a couple of pages. I said when you looked horrified at the prospect of speaking for 40 minutes that a shorter presentation is fine, but I'll be asking you some questions and answers. And I'll ask the other students to help me with that. I don't want to be the only one asking Q&A. It'll be a very important part of it. One thing I always give good scores for is if somebody has what I call a hip pocket slide. If I were to ask you a question like, Ibrahim Rada, what exactly is a cone of depression? And you were to be able to pull up a slide, maybe a different one from the presentation slides you have on your poster, and you could speak to a cone of depression and the example I drew on the board of how a cone of depression can leave an existing well high and dry. So I'll be asking questions, so will all of you. Not having a hip pocket slide certainly isn't a problem, but if you have some that you can call up when you're asked a question, that's very powerful at a technical presentation or in a business presentation to impress your boss and colleagues. Okay, I would say, are there any questions? But this is not a live broadcast. Again, we'll spend a lot of time together at the development exhibition. So I wanted to spend the last few minutes, this isn't going on too long, the last few minutes just reminding you of how much we've learned in this class. And in a sense, this will be a refresher for things to make a note or two about, for things to be sure and mention in your presentations. And the terminology is very important, so be mindful of that as well. So we learned about desertification. Of course, it's the most compelling problem in our area, and we learned the C3P, the concise, compelling, and clear proposition, which is that desertification is happening as a consequence of unsustainable land use, but is exacerbated, is accelerated by the unsustainable land uses of grazing, overgrazing, and deforestation, and how those are exposing the soil to the heating and erosive forces, the lack of rebuilding that is part and parcel of desertification. In discussing global warming, we spoke a little bit more broadly about it. We spoke about its other effects on the water cycle, such as accelerated melting of glaciers, the flood cycle downstream from those glaciers and rivers. And then we talked about policy. We talked about policy is an instrument in global warming. If you remember, the C3P is that the global warming policy isn't really working that well because it's so complicated, but it does represent an unprecedented combination of science and economics to solve a world problem. It has as an incidental benefit an instrument, the clean development mechanism, to flow money from the rich countries to the poor countries and pay for countries such as Nigeria to do projects such as deploying Jatropha or changing out our diesel generators for natural gas generators. So we talked about the overall global warming policy, but we also spoke, and I discussed it with you over the video conference, policies as a general instrument. Policies, what they're supposed to accomplish, their relationship to elections and legislation. And we talked about the difference between mandates and markets. You've heard at several different points in this class, plus you read about the policy implications of assigning a price to water and how simply by assigning a price, we're sending a market signal to make people use water more intelligently, more frugally, and to incentivize the use of water-efficient technologies, many of which we discussed. We also saw a TED Talk, the best TED Talk. I can't remember the guy's name now, but it had to do with a river, and I think a beer brewery, and how this river was restored simply by allowing the users of the water to buy the right to use that water with not donations. They were required to under a market-driven policy, and how that restored the health to that river. It was in Washington State, I believe. So understanding policies is a general mechanism. In several of your posters, if they didn't mention policy, I put that language in there because I knew that if the founder, President Markey, or others looked at your posters, they're going to want to see how policy is one of the instruments that's used to promote sustainable water usage, water management practices in Adamawa State. We talked about the specifics of Adamawa State, about the high PE, high ratio of evaporation relative to precipitation, and how that explains drought and the extreme seasonality of vegetation, of precipitation. I added a graphic to Hafsat's poster that you'll see. And by the way, there'll be much to learn by looking at each other's posters carefully. So we have an extremely seasonal rain cycle, and you all knew that, and that was certainly reflected in some of your posters, but that's what's responsible for desertification and responsible for flooding, as Hafsat's C3P said, for the cycle of sustenance and hardship. flooding and drought. That's the hardship part. So we learned about Adamawa and its land uses such as agriculture and and we learned about ways to improve agriculture with water efficient technology and the more crop per drop strategies of combining aquaculture and agriculture. I only wish we'd had time to take a field trip to Babagari Barayas. Ibrahim Rada, I know that you've been there to see how he's raising fish and planning on using the effluent of the fish pond for fertigation, for growing some crops using the extra fertility. So we talked about Adamawa, we talked about agriculture and the different forms of agriculture and the potential centralization of agriculture along the river. We had a lot that we talked about on the field trip. Ibrahim King and Hafsat, I hope that you really looked carefully at the field trip video because that was so important in pulling together much of the content of the class and focusing it on things that we were seeing firsthand. We talked a lot about wetlands. Why wetlands are important. I took us a long way from Adamawa to tell you about the disaster of Katrina and how Katrina was exacerbated by the destruction of wetlands and the various forces such as channelization of the river and the unregulated activity of oil and gas industry, the deforestation there of the coastal swamps. So we talked about wetlands and their natural benefits, and we also talked about how they can be used. We walked out to see the wetland system that the STAR students put in and talked about how the bacteria in the rocks serve as a biofiltration or bioretention unit. On the field trip, we talked about waste and how waste is being dumped in wetlands ecosystems. That was our second to the last stop. And we looked at, all our municipal waste getting dumped in this wetlands to be used as a fill to build buildings on. And that destroys the wetlands, which provides, again, an important work to please carry forward, an important word or phrase to please carry forward in your career, ecosystem services. The economic benefits of a natural system to human society. Wetlands prevent flooding. They're like big sponges that soak up water during a storm event and release it. And they catch pollution such as the first flood after a storm water event, that pollution that runs when it first starts to rain. And the wetlands attenuate that pollution. And in some places like coasts or riversides, wetlands are the nurseries for species that then supply the food chain of different kinds of little insects and small fish. They can only breed in wetlands, and then they go out and grow into big fish, or they're eaten by big fish. So when we destroy wetlands, by not protecting them, or in Adamawa's case, dumping waste into them, we are destroying an ecological service. I used the example of ecosystem services in forestry. I talked about Costa Rica, and then I talked about a hypothetical forestry decision that, for instance, the president of Nigeria would make, comparing the economics of just the wood against the economics of the overall forest and its benefits in terms of flood protection, reversal of desertification, not clogging up rivers, which is what happens, for instance, in Haiti. Oh, and what just happened in the Philippines during this terrible, terrible natural disaster. When forests are left intact and natural systems, including wetlands, they immunize the human communities. They protect it in a measure from the impact of disasters. We talked about the whole hydrologic cycle. And what better, cooler way to do it than hear it from a professor at American University of Bulgaria, who's a good lecturer and spent hard time preparing your lecture. We talked about the aquifers and how the groundwater gets recharged. The difference between a fossil aquifer, usually a confined aquifer, versus an unconfined aquifer, which is the water table, which is replenished. And the unconfined aquifer is the one that's more subject to pollution because it's shallow and the pollutants will go down and affect it. And Ibrahim King's poster talks about that. And I think Hafsat's also talks about pollution in the context of surface water. Of course, surface water and the near surface aquifer are intimately connected. Did I say that in class? Probably not in so many words. Should you discern it from what I'm teaching? I certainly think so. But I'm saying it now because this is my last time lecturing to you, that the surface water and the near surface aquifer are intimately interconnected because of their proximity and the relationship between, for instance, streams and rivers and still water bodies like lakes and the near surface water table. We talked about aquifer recharge. One more manifestation of this intimacy and the way that humans can influence it. I had said earlier in the class, well, there are these sophisticated infiltration galleries. I showed pictures of a injection well that takes water from the surface and pumps it down, only to have a gentleman from Lebanon, Imad Saul, who knows more about this subject than I, come on and very politely contradict me and say, well, students, I know more about this than your professor, and those injection wells don't make much sense. What is the solution? The solution is near surface seepage injection. He talked about it. He didn't have a slide, so I scrambled through my Google images to find a good example of surface manipulations that will encourage infiltration. And those are now in Hafsat's poster and make it really powerful in terms of making this point, which is one of the most important things that Chairman Joda and our founder and others who are big landowners, the Chief Abdul Mumini, need to know. It is, let's manage the land differently to stop the erosive runoff, slow that water down, and infiltrate it into the aquifers. And we got to hear it from one of the top experts, thanks to this distance education thing. Needless to say, I'm pretty excited and proud of that part of this class. And we talked about permaculture. And permaculture is a science. Sorry, we didn't speak about it more, but I did talk a little bit about it. I think I showed the logo, that it's a science that promotes a new paradigm of agriculture that looks equally at dry or at, kind of terrestrial versus freshwater aquatic system as the basis for agriculture. And it talks about growing systems to provide food and meet other human needs that emulate natural ecosystems. And since this is a course on water, we want to talk about the natural systems of water recharge, aquifer recharge, that have been destroyed by unsustainable human use during or as part of desertification, and how permaculture tries to restore those. It's a to emulate natural systems. Okay, and then we're almost to the almost to the end. Thank you for your patience. We talked a lot about stormwater and how stormwater is so. Our whole way of thinking about stormwater is screwed up. That engineers designed to shed the stormwater as quickly as possible, get impermeable roof water onto impermeable parking lots, into impermeable cement drains, and then send them off as fast as possible to the property downstream, and then keep shoving it downstream until the people at the bottom get all the stormwater of a major rain event and suffer the flooding. The new paradigm is don't get rid of your stormwater and retain it in your system, because then it can be used for irrigation, for instance, in the case of a university, for horticulture or landscaping, so we don't have to pump water from the aquifer. So change the whole stormwater management paradigm. And we've walked around the library, and I added pictures of the library to replace the ones in Harrison's photo, because I'm very proud of how we capture the roof water at the library and put it into bioswale and encourage it to infiltrate and discourage this damaging export of surface water to the downstream community. Now that's a whole change in municipal infrastructure. And Harrison's poster describes that, both bioswales and engineered wetlands. Harrison also talks about cisterns. We forgot or didn't think to talk about super water use efficient technology in urban infrastructure. It's so mundane as a water efficient toilet or shower fixtures, or I didn't even talk about it, but it's worth mentioning briefly now. Some of you have been to faucets that turn off automatically when you're done washing your hands. Toilets that don't leak. Our toilets at the university are always overflowing. So that's a municipal infrastructure also. And then lastly, and Ibrahim Thanda, you caught up with this right away, and this is so true. Tourism. Water is a fabulous field of opportunity for tourism in Adamawa. And tourism brings nothing but good to our community in terms of people with the money to pay tax, pay all the fees, I guess you could call them taxes, the fees to come here. My daughters are paying, I am paying draconian fees in terms of visa and processing fees and so forth to bring my kids into the country. And meanwhile, we'll just spend money like crazy, I'm sorry to say, when we're here going out to Yankari. And I just learned about some waterfalls I'm going to take the kids to north of Abuja. They're not kids anymore, they're older than you guys, but they'll always seem that way to me. So people who come and stay at a riverfront lodge on the Benue River and then go horseback riding and for boat rides and into the villages where they buy baskets and ceremonial drums and all that. And then they come to restaurants in town and they pay to rent cars and they pay guides. Fabulous amounts of money that can come to our community, centered around one of our loveliest resources, which is the Benue River and the hot springs that Ibrahim's poster speaks to, and and other water-related features, such as the Little River that several of us on the field trip waded through the Little River to get to the village. It sounds funny, but to Baturis, that's a huge adventure. For somebody from the United States, take off their boots and wade through a river to go see a village, that's the kind of thing somebody spent $1,000 to do to and I waded through a river to go see a village and met the chief of the village, bought this basket. Wow. So, you know, other forms of ecotourism exist, not associated with water, but I think it's fair, very fair for Ibrahim King to talk about water as the centerpiece of that. Okay, well, there you go. The whole darn class in a 1.5 hour capsule. I hope you're taking lots of notes. I didn't ask you, I presume this is being recorded, Dr. Tanawat, so because he's showing it to you again later. So it'll be saved and you can go, really, take the time to go over it. Take the time to watch it together and have a discussion. That is something I've encouraged from day one, is for you guys to work together on your posters because it's more fun than working by yourself and it reinforces. Okay, well, I think that's the end of this broadcast. I will see you maybe today at the end of class, inshallah. Otherwise, we'll spend lots of time together. Watch your email very closely, because if this development exhibition really starts at 9 o'clock sharp, and that's when President Margie and the founder come, you need to be there. And I know the most important time for you to be there is right after the ceremony, when everybody's going to be coming out. And in fact, there's going to be an announcement. There will be an announcement made at the end of the ceremony that there's a development exhibition with students and there are snacks. And please don't just leave, but linger outside and admire the students' excellent work. Okay, I sure hope this recorded clearly. I tried to enunciate clearly and go slowly. Have a good rest of the class. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations. Remember that I will see your comments. They'll be so valuable to me. They will be typed up, so I won't recognize your handwriting and have my feelings hurt. And I hugely need that because I want to be a better and better instructor every time I get in front of the class, or in this case, in front of a camera. Okay, Dr. Tanawat, why don't you reply as to whether or not you got all this on the recorder? Good. All came in loud and clear. That's fabulous. Okay, well, mission accomplished on this and the posters. So I'll see everybody later. Have a nice afternoon. And Dr. Tanawat, Pete, thank you very much for setting up to record this. All right, bye-bye.